substance I prefer to abuse.
So I guess my question is, you had said that we're looking at a real downward turn in.
No, I'm just talking frankly about, and I believe accurately about the data that we're about to see. Because we've paused the economy, then there's a drop-off in things like industrial production and employment and GDP and all the things that economists follow. And that drop-off, which we're about to see, in the next few weeks, we'll see like some major signs of it, is going to look like a drop that's as big as anything that we've seen since the Great Depression. That does not mean in any way that we're going to have a Great Depression, but it does mean that there's some serious policy challenges ahead. And I think that the first three phases of stimulus have done a good job of helping us build a bridge to the other side of this major shock. But once we get to the other side of it, there's still going to be work to do. And that's why we need to have the rapid legislation.
There are a lot of small business owners who say they still can't get stimulus that has been offered, and that the larger companies have gotten money that was earmarked for them. How can you all rectify that? What are you going to do to stop that?
Well, more than 1 million loans to firms that have 10 or fewer employees. There are 1,800 banks making loans. A couple weeks ago, it's up to 5,000 now.
But what about the larger companies that are getting it?
Well, no. So again, when you're making these loans that have very favorable rates in order to help businesses make it through, say, to the other side of the crisis, then there's a risk that people would make up, fraudulent businesses in order to take the loans and then just abscond with
Will there
money.
be repercussions?
And so what the designers of the bill did is they said, well, if there's a bank with an existing customer that they have a strong relationship with, then that bank will be empowered to lend to that customer. And so what they've done since the bill was incredibly successful at getting a massive amount of money out to small businesses that needed it. Again, with more than 1 million going to firms with 10 or fewer people. But I think that the second round specifically earmarked, I think it was $60 billion for communities, distressed communities, and also added, the regulators have added a huge number of banks, up to about 5,000, to make sure that they are hitting everybody. But my expectation is that if we run out of money again because the thing is so successful that everybody's getting the loans, then Congress will come back in and they'll put more money in that pool.
But will there be repercussions for the larger companies who have taken the smaller companies' money? You had said there's fraud, so there's repercussions?
I didn't accuse
the larger I'm not saying that, but you said there could be. So if there is...
If there were fraud, of course, then it would be pursued aggressively. But I think that, for the most part, the policy has been just an enormous success. It's had a huge impact on really, 1 million small businesses with employees, fewer than 10 employees. And the reason why we had to re-up the money is that there's so much money going out the doors to the people who need it. And so for sure, I know that there are some sad stories about people getting stuck at the website and so on. But
I think the sad stories are about the larger companies stealing the money. There's
some people who took loans and returned them, and that's something that's happened too. But certainly the vast majority of the loans that have been made to firms that were the target of the policy.
And finally, just to follow up on what I asked you at first, when I was, how do I put this? So if you have that drop-off that is as large or larger than the Great Depression, how do you avoid an economy that collapses?
Sure, that's exactly the right question, and it's the thing that we've been working very hard on. The team was working on it before I got back, and we've been working on it less since I got back. And the bottom line is that when you get a big negative shock like this, then you need big, aggressive policies like the ones the president has advocated and worked with Congress to enact. And so we're not going to have a depression because we're not going to make the policy mistakes that they made back then. And we're going to have a much quicker recovery than we had after the Great Recession because we're not going to make the policy mistakes that the Obama administration made when they, told us there were shovel-ready projects that if we bought a bunch of clunkers, it would revive the auto industry and so on. And so we're not going to make those mistakes. We're going to make great policies, and that's why we believe that we're going to not have depression. But we are faced with the biggest shock that has hit this economy since the Great Depression, and you have to be frank with the American people about that.
And so how do you bail out the people? The real fear is that you're going to bail out the large corporations and not bail out people. And where do you put your resources?
If you look at the resources are massive resources in checks mailed to people. I think 88 million of them have gone out already, if I've got the number right. Massive amount of money for small business loans, with more than 1 million. I mentioned this a couple of times, going to firms with fewer than 10 people. Bailout for hospitals who are disproportionately bearing the costs of this COVID epidemic. And so I think that Congress has, in a bipartisan way, come together to address the problems prudently. And I think that President Trump's leadership is going to help us come out of this okay, for sure. But again, when that happens, when we come out the other side, and the economy's back to where it was, the strong economy that Trump's policies gave us, then we'll have to look back at this and say, wow, those folks were hit with the biggest shock ever, and they did well. What made that happen? Well, what made that happen is the leadership that we're seeing from this White House on policy.
And how long do you think it will take to rebound?
Yeah, that's going to depend on the next phase of legislation for me to.
You give it a ballpark estimate.
I have to wait and see what policies the president picks and what Congress adopts, and then I can model it.
Okay,
right
so
now,
what would be ideal?
I also need to know what the path of the virus is, and when is there something that will treat it, and when is there a vaccine, and
so we could be
right
talking
now
years.
Right now, looking ahead is something that I just don't have the modeling capability to do, because there's so many unknowns. The unknown about the virus, the unknown about what policies. But once we get the policies, which will be in 3 or 4 weeks, then I'll come back out here and I'll give you a firmer answer. But right now, the next phase is probably the most important phase of stimulus. And once we have that in our pocket, then we can model it and tell you how long we think this is going to last.